Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you doing?
I am doing just peachy. I'm just about to head off to do an Advanced Movement Principles low back in Santa Cruz, followed by a Advanced Movement Principles lower body in Charleston, South Carolina. So I'll see a little bit of the world and see a little bit of the coast. And and we're also, I'm working on guests, guys, for the coming year. So if you have any suggestions, let us know. We've got a few exciting ones on our docket, but we're going to keep working on that just to get some other voices into the mix here.
Yeah, and please do. If you guys have any suggestions, we'd love to hear it because we know a lot of people. Between Nora and I, we've met a lot of people in the fitness industry. We've taught alongside them at conferences and whatnot, and we're reaching out to them. But if you know of somebody and be like, and we don't know that person, we'd love to meet them. We'd love to find out more information. That would be awesome. So you can get a hold of us at movingconvos@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to get in touch with us. And while we're at it, do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe button. That way you get the notification every time a new episode drops on Tuesday. You can always look at us also on our video feeds on Instagram, Moving Convos, and our Facebook, Moving Conversations.
Awesome.
All right.
So the whole reason we started this conversation, Brian and I decided we wanted to do a podcast, was because we want to learn things basically from each other and then also from our guests. So if there's anything you desperately want to know about, again, put it in the comments, send it off as an email, give us some suggestions, because that's our whole point here, is just help you learn. You learn a few things, get a little better at what you do, help us learn a few things, and just get some information out there that might be useful to you. So. All right. Speaking of which, today our topic is
we're going to be doing hamstrings. Yeah, I was looking through things that for my own body. I'm gonna tell you the real reason why I even thought of this. I was coming back from a trip, and on the airplane, not on the plane, but when I was walking. After I landed, I was walking from one gate to the other. It was a long international flight, walking from one terminal to the next in San Francisco. When I got to the next terminal, my knee started hurting a lot. Out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere. Getting off the plane, no issues. And, it came and went over the next few weeks. Then when I moved, literally, I went walking down the stairs and suddenly I felt this unbelievable pain in my knee. As I turned, like it just gave out on me, figure what's going on here? And it didn't clear up for about a week and a half, about almost 2 weeks. Then I went to the gym with my boys and I decided I'm going to do a little bit of hamstring work. And believe it or not, that seemed to set things a little bit right with what was going on. And I said, ooh, okay, interesting. And again, going back through listen, if you guys are anything like Nora and I, we are compressed for time with our schedules and whatnot. So a lot of times it's sort of, okay, what has priority in our workouts?
Yeah.
We've got a short amount of time. We have to prioritize. So there are some muscle groups that we don't probably train as much as we should. And a lot of times I do more joint compound movements and whatnot. But by doing a little bit of specificity on the hamstrings, that knee went away and hasn't bothered me since. So I thought, okay, interesting. I wonder why. And it was just one of those things in my brain I'm trying to figure out. And I thought, I don't train my hamstrings as much as I used to, and not with the specificity that I used to. So I thought, are there other muscles that we're sort of forgetting and maybe we're not prioritizing, but still need to be addressed, need a little bit of attention. And when they don't get attention, it's like the child that doesn't get enough attention. Eventually they begin to act out and act the fool. And my knee started doing that. So I thought, you know what? Let's do the hamstrings, since that was sort of on my mind at that moment. And it's something that I thought I need to add back in. And also, you and I have both had a number of clients who have had issues with hamstrings.
All
that I
kinds.
thought this is a great thing for us to talk about. Let's dive into the hamstrings and see where it goes. I know, long story. Sorry, long story there.
So the hamstrings. Now, the interesting thing about the hamstrings is several things. One, people are very unaware of the hamstrings. I would think the hamstrings are kind of like, unless they're cramping, unless you did a bridge and they cramped, most people don't. They're not aware of them that much. They don't feel
Yeah.
them that much. Not like the quads. The quads, you do a squat, you sit down, you feel them. The hamstrings are just this kind of funny, kind of hard to feel part of the body.
Hmm.
And a lot of things can happen with the hamstrings. Like let's just start thinking about what their role is.
Hmm.
Yeah. So the hamstrings go essentially from the sit bone, the ischial tuberosity, which you're probably sitting on right now, unless you're wandering about. And it goes down to the back of the knee. We have a medial hamstring that goes to the medial side of the knee, ends up actually pulling on the medial meniscus potentially, and then coming into the pes anserinus, one piece, and then one piece really goes to the back of the tibia. On the lateral side, we have the biceps femoris, which comes down the lateral side of the leg and attaches onto the head of the fibula. More on that in a minute, right? Because
Yep.
that's a problematic area there. And hamstrings are very prone to being tight, for sure,
Hmm.
to being undertrained, for sure. To if you've ever had a damage at the attachment of the hamstring, where the hamstring sits on the ischial tuberosity, tendinosis, not
Yeah.
tendonitis, but tendinosis, meaning a degradation of that tendon tissue, is really common there and can cause
Incredibly
like
common.
years of pain for clients if it's not dealt with appropriately. And even if it is, it just could be a long-term problem.
And
So
that
lots of
I've
things can
seen a
happen
lot
there.
of.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Me too.
And if you think about it, then the hamstring is much like the biceps in that it affects two joints because it affects
Yes.
the hip
Yep.
as well as
Yep.
the
Yep.
knee.
Yep.
And most of the time when you go to let's say you're just going to a gym environment, what's the thing they put you on? Hamstring curl machine. Really, they're talking about just the knee portion. We're really talking about the lower end. So that's the part
Hmm.
that gets addressed in people's minds a lot of times if they don't have a lot of experience with their hamstrings. They don't necessarily think of the upper end unless it's giving them problems, unless
Right.
it's pulling on, that sits bone, unless it's affecting their pelvis, their low back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So people don't tend to think about the upper end in general, the general population.
And when does it, so the other thing I would say about that upper end is I've been in many training situations, both in Pilates and in personal training. And I'm even thinking of like when I was first learned the Coraline training, where let's say you are standing up and you are doing like you're standing on one leg. Let's say your other leg is on the shoulder rest on the reformer or on the Coraline cart or anyway, you're basically going to be taking that free leg and moving it into extension, even
Mhm,
with that knee bent, right? So kind of a lunge situation, basically, but going past 90 degrees, right? Or going past neutral.
mhm,
So one of the things that that I've certainly seen more than once is that there's a lot of routines that will say, okay, don't take that femur past neutral with the pelvis. Don't take it
mm,
into extension. Like you think about a 90-90 lunge,
right,
right? 90-90 lunge, the whole goal is like you just drop that femur straight down below the hips and you're not sending it back into extension.
right,
Now, this gets to the glutes a little bit also, but one of the things I found was for many of my clients, and I just did this by kind of poking into their hamstrings, unless they go into some hip extension, that
yeah,
hamstring doesn't fire.
right,
Particular, like it can, I can be like I just smush almost all the way to the bone until they go into a little more hip extension.
yep,
So it's just one of those things where you kind of got to really monitor when the hamstrings are working and when they're not
mhm.
because that varies wildly on different people.
It does, and I agree. I think hip extension, that's why when you were explaining that, I was thinking, "Man, I don't know many situations where I wouldn't want to train the hamstrings into extension," because if you think about even doing a common bridge, We're
Yeah.
really taking the hips and bringing them into neutral and even slightly beyond into extension because we want the glutes to fire. Yes, but you're also getting the hamstrings to fire. They're
Mhm.
A lot of people say, oh, you don't want the hamstrings or you only want the glutes. Look, guys, they're both going to fire. It's going to
If you're
happen.
extending the hip, all the muscles attached to that
Yeah.
extension. Then now one thing too, so two pieces on that. One is there is that relationship with the glutes and the hamstrings for sure. And a lot of times I will work with people on the timing of who
Yes.
fires when, right?
Yes.
But the other thing that I want to mention before we get even any farther along is and again, I always think these are sort of funny, but in a normal body, whatever the heck that is, the quads are roughly 70% and the hamstrings are roughly 30%
Yeah.
in terms of just a strength imbalance. Now, one other thing there, though, is when you are doing something like a squat, right? A basic functional movement, there are many different strategies for that.
Mhm.
And this really gets into that hamstring quad balance and how that hamstring is participating or not.
Right.
So, and I think we did this the other day, but basically, like you can emphasize the quads by coming forward onto the toes. You can
Right.
emphasize the hamstring coming back onto the heels,
Yep.
and very often, uh, particularly the two joints. So the hamstrings are primarily two joints, except for one head of the biceps femoris. The quads are not. The quads is just one piece. That rectus femoris, it's two joint. But all those two joint muscles really can like vary who's doing what and when in a squat motion, right? Because they're shortening at one end.
Yep.
In the hamstrings case at the knee, and they're kind of getting stretched at the upper end. With the rectus femoris, it's shortening at the top end and getting stretched at the bottom end. So they don't
Mhm.
really change length very much in that motion.
Yep.
Hopefully that made sense. That was a little complicated.
No, and in general, I mean, we've all learned this back when we were baby trainers and baby Pilates instructors. When you push through the heels, we are going to get more of the posterior chain firing. You're going to get more glutes and more hamstring action. If you're more on your toes, you're going to get more quadricep action. And we see that all the time in fitness.
Yeah.
In fact, you see a lot of people even want to elevate the heels. People who can't get deep enough
Yeah.
in the squat, they say elevate
Yep.
the heels, put your feet on a two
On
by
a
four
board or a
or
box or something. Yeah. Or a
something.
pad. Yeah.
The problem is that definitely shifts your weight into your toes a lot. You're
Yeah.
transferring that weight directly into the knees, and I've seen some people actually develop knee problems because of it, because there's so much shear
Yep.
force within that
Yep.
knee joint
Yep.
and on that patella. But you're really changing the dynamics and taking pressure and taking some of the focus off of the posterior chain. So the hamstrings, the upper hamstrings and the glutes aren't firing nearly as strongly as they could if the heels were flat. And again, depending on what your goal is, some people definitely want to go super low for whatever reason. They have a goal. That's fine. But in a regular squat, and I tell my clients this all the time, I don't really care how low you're going, whatever's comfortable for your body, because everybody's hips are shaped differently. Everybody, the way the femur goes into the acetabulum, the head of the femur, everybody's a little different. Some people can squat deep, some people can't. Do what feels comfortable to your body and what you're able to do. And I want them to feel the whole foot. And sometimes I'll emphasize the heels a little bit more if I just notice them rocking toward their toes a little. But we see that a lot in the fitness world.
Right. And one thing I'd suggest with that is even if their heel is elevated, put weight in it. But a lot of
Mhm.
times, as soon as you elevate that heel, the weight of the body goes towards the big toe or goes to the
Yeah,
metatarsal, even if that heel is elevated and there's something under it to give you contact. If there's
yeah,
nothing under it to give you contact, it's really hard to get that connection going, right?
yeah,
Without that heel against something.
yeah,
So thinking about the hamstrings then just in terms of training, right? When we think about training the hamstrings, I really do like to think about both ends. So thinking
yes.
about knee bending and thinking about hip extending.
Mhm,
And then thinking about sort of the combination of those two things in various different movements and various different angles and various different ranges of motion.
mhm. Yeah. I do the same. I sort of think about almost as though it was, how do I put this? Two heads of a muscle. I'm gonna train more
Mhm.
of the knee end, and I'll train more of the hip end. But I'll definitely put two different exercises in for that.
Yep.
And toward the end of the episode, when we're giving some more of the functional aspects of things and specific exercise, we'll go over some of those. But I will absolutely separate the two sometimes because I want them to do both. And depending on what their goal is, what their objective is, I may lean more towards one than the other.
Exactly. And towards which one's working better for that
Right.
particular client, right? Because I've got some clients who are really good with now a muscle, the whole muscle is going to contract, even if you're
Hmm.
just moving one of those two joints. Just to be clear on that, we're not crazy there, but you can certainly emphasize the action at one area or the other. So, for a lot of clients, that deflection is pretty happening. Like that, I find is generally more active and a little better engaged than up at the hip. The hip extension piece is often what is missing for many of my
Hmm.
clients anyway. And playing with that. Now, one other thing that I like to play with here is the balance between the medial and the lateral hamstring.
Hmm.
Very typically, when you see somebody, let's say somebody is just either standing and bending their knee, or in Pilates, they're prone doing a little single leg kick with the knee bent, and that knee bends, that heel comes towards the bottom, and that lower leg rotates out. So that foot is laterally rotated, the tibia is laterally rotated relative to the femur.
Hmm.
Right? That's very, very, very common. And typically when I see that, there's a dominance in the lateral hamstring,
Yep.
which is going to put more pressure through the lateral leg, change how the tibia is relating to the femur, and all that. So with a client with that issue, I want to work on that medial hamstring to try to get that tibia to track as straight as it can. Right? If there's
Hmm.
tibial torsion, you're not going to get maybe where you ultimately want to go, but just to try to balance the effort and the force going through that knee joint by those two sides of the hamstring, those two different pieces.
I was just going over this with one of my sons. We were doing a hamstring exercise at the gym. And I said, I want your feet to stay perfectly parallel to each other. And every time he wanted to contract, he started rotating out. So I dropped the
Yep.
weight and I
Yep.
dropped the weight. And he'd say, I can do more. And I said, wait, I need you to be able to keep your feet parallel throughout. I said, and I explained how the muscle attaches. And he said, oh, I said, so when you rotate out, you're only working half the muscle, because in his mind, he can get, he's like, oh, that makes sense. I said, we need to work the medial side, the inner one. So when we found the right weight and his feet were parallel, he said, wow, I feel that so much more.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
now we can strengthen it and build the weight back up. But
Right.
people have a tendency to try and do too much. And that's right. Immediately, you're going to see those feet are going to turn out to 10 and 2 o'clock. And they're going to work that biceps femoris way more than they will the medial heads.
So if that concept is new to you, just take a look at your clients. Take a look at clients doing knee bending in any situation, and just notice what is happening with that lower leg if it's open chain down there. Um, and also take a look if you can see their hamstrings, like somebody's wearing shorts or whatever. Sometimes you can really see the difference in the two sides, and you can see that one side's really active and one side's not so much. And then when you balance out that lower leg, you'll often see like, oh, that the contour of the
Mhm.
back of the hamstring actually changes.
Yes.
Um, and that's again like thinking about how that hamstring feeds into the knee. I'm thinking of your story, Brian, at the beginning, where you realized the hamstring was really important for your knee health. Like,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
because the hamstring comes down to the medial side and the lateral side of the knee, and also the posterior part of the knee. And if
Yep.
there's an imbalance there, right, it's going to be torquing that tibia on that femur, or pulling too hard on one side, or
Yep.
possibly pinching that meniscus, but just causing some potential little misalignment that could irritate a meniscus or could irritate something else.
Yeah. And in my case, it was the lateral head, and my fibula actually felt like it was dislocating.
Yes.
And as
Yep.
soon as I started getting the hamstring firing, I felt it pull the fibula head into where it belongs, and it
Oh,
stabilized immediately. And it was just one of
interesting.
those, oh, sort of a wake up moment for me. And I
Yeah.
did that for a couple of workouts. I have had zero discomfort. I was limping severely for about a week and a half. And after that, immediately the pain went away. So for me, it probably was slightly out of where it should
Yeah.
have been.
Yep. Yep.
And I just pulled it right back in. And it was like, oh, done, easy. And yeah, I find that creating that balance is really important. I don't have in my studio like a hamstring curl machine. We do most of our curls, if I'm going to focus on the lower end, on a ball or on a suspension trainer or on the
Mhm.
Coraline, or one of my favorites, sitting on a low stool in the hallway, walking down the hall,
Right, right,
sitting on a low
right.
stool. Great exercises. But again, you need to make sure that you're monitoring where their feet are. Are they staying
Mhm.
straight ahead?
Mhm.
Or if you know that they have an imbalance and one side is a little stronger, I may goose them just, a degree or two toward the weaker side, just to put their mind there. They may not be there. I may say, I want you to think about slightly internally rotating, and they're still going to be externally rotated. But if I can mentally get them to engage the intent, at least get the intent on the medial heads, then that can begin firing a little bit stronger.
Right, and one of the things I wanted to, because we just kind of went into that, dove into that intensely in a way, which is really important for the hamstring health. But one of the things about that is, if you do have a client who does have some tibial rotation, so tibial torsion, they sometimes call it, where really the knee and the foot are not going to line up. Right, it's just there's a twist in the bone, or there's just a structural
Yep.
issue there. And what I'll find there is, like, then if I try to align the foot, I get major internal rotation at the knee, right, and
Yeah.
at the hip. And so oftentimes with clients who have that, sometimes it's called malicious malalignment or other kinds of issues for it, where the femur is straight and the tibia is laterally rotated. If I'm going to correct that, I want to prioritize the hip to the knee being in
Yep.
alignment. So with the chair, for example, right, my hip and my knee are straight ahead. My feet may be slightly turned out, because if they bring their feet parallel, their knees knock.
Yes.
Yeah. So then I've just got to figure out, okay, how much, and I love the fact that you said 1 or 2 degrees, like, can I bring those feet in just a little bit without disturbing the hip to the knee alignment?
Yep.
Right. And then take the action from there, where there's just that extra activation through that medial side, but you're not distorting the rest of the structure. And that gets tricky with the knees.
And how many times have we, with our own bodies or with a client's bodies, worked on more intention than actually having them move their body? You
Right,
know?
like focus on the inside of the foot, for
Right.
example, right?
Exactly.
Instead of the outside of the foot or something like that.
Right. Small things that you can remind them, push through your
Yep,
big toe rather than the lateral part of your foot. And I'll
yep,
tell them, I just want you to think about taking that big toe, your big toes, and keep them pointing towards each other slightly. And
yep.
again, almost everybody, if they're lucky, they get straight.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Rarely have I had
Most of them
anybody
just go, like,
internal.
a little bit out of external. I've had a couple of
Exactly.
people with internal, but it's rare in our
It's
particular
rare.
population.
It's
Yeah, not
pretty
so much in
rare.
other places, but here it's pretty rare.
Right. But there are occasions, and I'm going to stress that. I have one client in particular doing lunges, doing hamstrings, anything, she's internally rotated. Now she has, you know, dysfunction, pelvic floor, all these sorts of things. So
Mhm.
her internal rotators, believe it or not, are overpowering her external rotators. She's one of the only people I've met like this, but
Yep,
they do exist. So don't just lump everybody into one side, because for her, I literally have to say, turn your toes out, turn your toes out slightly,
right, right.
slightly.
Yep,
I'm 5 degrees, not a lot, because I don't want her riding on that and having her tibia, trying to twist. I just
mhm,
want to get the lateral side of the hamstrings or her external rotators firing a little bit more.
yep. One of the things, this just speaking of that particular client, one of the things that was a test for me, and one of the tests that I learned from one of the docs I worked with, was understanding whether that internal rotation, if it's in the femurs, is from the hip joint structure. So for clients where it is in the hip joint structure, when the hip is flexed, they can straighten out their knees. But
Mhm.
as soon as they go to fully straight, that you really see those
Yep,
the
they rotate
femurs
in.
really roll in. And that's some of that malicious malalignment, where it's actually the ligament and joint structure that you're not gonna, you can, again, you can gently encourage other options, but you're not, in my experience, going to change that alignment, right?
Yeah.
Is that's joint structure, pretty deep joint structure. If they're an adult, that joint structure is not necessarily going to be changing anytime soon.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, something I want to throw at you. We've talked about the lower end,
Yeah.
the upper end, which I've heard a lot from strength trainers, and I'm talking about strength and conditioning coaches
Hmm.
who focus a lot on squats, who focus a lot on Olympic moves and things like that. They focus a lot more on that. You're not going to see them do a whole lot of, hamstring curl type of activities. They're really
Right.
focusing on hip extension. But their thought, and I've heard this from a number of people, is that the hamstrings, the upper hamstrings and the glutes work great in deceleration, that they are a hip decelerator, especially in
Hmm.
running, in motion, in walking, in lunging. As I lunge
Yes.
forward, it's catching me. Those muscles are
Right.
really, that eccentric is catching me to prevent
Uh-huh.
me from, landing on the ground. And that those muscles, that's a real primary function of those, rather than just being a hip extensor, but really focusing a lot on the eccentric and functioning as a decelerator.
So kind of like the soleus,
Yeah,
right? Landing from a jump. Does that same now it can't just be the top, it's got to be the whole hamstring and the glute,
it's true.
right?
Yeah,
Right. So
absolutely.
that whole posterior chain. Um, well, that's interesting.
So like I say, I've heard this from a couple of different people.
Yeah.
Uh, that functionally the glutes and the hamstrings, and they usually refer to it as upper hamstrings, are a
Hmm.
decelerator of the hip.
Hmm.
Because when you are running, if you
Yeah.
think about it, you're not just pushing off for acceleration, but that leg in front of you is
Yeah.
catching the ground. It is
Right.
catching you at full speed and
Exactly.
having to decelerate
Absorb
and then
that.
accelerate at one time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a
Hmm.
lot of forces going through it. So it has
Yep.
to transfer force
Yep.
in a different way than a lot of the things that we tend to think about. So just something to think about, uh, and something that I've worked on with a lot of my clients is focusing on trying to get the hamstrings and the glutes engaged in a lunge environment and things of that nature, more on a deceleration. So on a Bosu, or even just in a forward lunge, really focusing on landing heel toe and really taking in that weight and catching themselves and then pushing themselves back, catching themselves, really focusing on that. And I find those with dysfunctional hamstrings are able to do that a lot better than if I focused on more of a hamstring shortening exercise,
Hmm.
like a hamstring curl, so to speak.
Right. Well, we talk about this a lot, but you get the whole functional chain working together, you have
Mhm.
better results often than if you just take a piece of the pie,
Yeah.
right? And now sometimes you got to get that piece of the pie woken up. So a lot of times, if I'm doing curls or I'm doing hip extension work with, let's say, a straight leg, like feet in straps or something like that, I'm just trying to wake up an area that is sleepy.
Mhm.
But in terms of function, that's exactly right. So it's like if you want to land from a run, you want to land from a jump, that deceleration is critical to decreasing stress on all the joints, right? All the way up through the
Yep.
head. So I kind of love that idea actually. And I again, that's something where working a lot on smoothness and flow. I'm thinking
Mhm.
a lot of doing this with a suspension trainer, like the Bodhi or something like that, where you're basically doing squats supported. So
Yes.
you're holding onto the straps, you're squatting down, you're squatting up, you're coming down, you're coming up, and really
Yep.
finding that smooth down and smooth up,
Mhm.
um, to really get the whole system working in a coordinated way. Because a lot of
Mhm.
times you'll find people can kind of pop up out of it or plop down into it, but they
Mhm.
can't find that smooth integration of up to down.
Yeah. Well, we're also talking about a part of the anatomy that's feeding into the thoracolumbar fascia. We're talking about the fascial system. So
Yeah.
when I have them do it on a Bosu, for instance, or even just a regular forward lunge, I have them try and find a rhythm where they're having I, I hate to use the word bounce, but that there's a little bit of that
Yeah.
elasticity
Yep.
where they're
Yep. Yep.
going forward and coming back, going forward,
Yep.
catching themselves and coming back, and
Yep.
using that elasticity to really
Hmm.
begin to get the fibers working in the proper angles again. And I've actually had success in this with things like the tendinosis eventually. It takes a long period of time.
Yeah.
But by doing that, instead of just shortening the muscle all the time, You're
Yeah.
allowing it to have the elasticity and firing pattern correct
Right.
without necessarily banging on it with a lot of hamstring work.
Right. So the idea there is basically that you're getting that concentric eccentric coordination going for it,
Mhm.
right? Along with everybody else in that chain.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. And that's where that balance, like I do that a lot with the soleus also,
Mhm.
just kind of like getting that spring action,
Yep.
because that is a lot of, for me, that's, well, I just thought about this, so this may or may not be true. But but when I think about deceleration, a lot of it is that spring, right? That you decelerate, and then usually that's setting you up for an acceleration or a
Mhm.
concentric contraction to, to go into your next run, your next step, your next jump.
Yep.
Right. So it's that how do I coordinate that timing? And I know so many clients that I can think of don't have good timing in that. Right. Like
Mhm.
in your case, if I'm doing just a forward lunge, whether on that boast or I'm just on the ground, I'm stepping forward, I'm landing. What happens? They get wiggly, they lose balance, they land hard, right? They can't kind of
Pause.
like, right. Exactly. They
They
can't kind of
had to
like,
stop
yes,
and then push
exactly.
back.
Yep. And even the
Yep.
pushing back, they lose balance on that one too, right?
Yep.
So again, getting that, like, how do I spring forward to this and how do I spring back into this? And then the
Mhm.
other piece that you mentioned, but I want to thread out a little bit, pull out a little bit, is typically we work the hamstrings in the sagittal plane and often
Mhm.
parallel.
Mhm.
But again, like even with the lunge, that's why, Brian, I love things like the clock lunge, right? Where you're going
Exactly.
forward, like to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and can you keep going around? And to do that with that same idea of spring and back and
Uh-huh.
spring and back and spring and back, to get those different fiber angles activated.
Yes.
Right. And that's not just the hamstrings, folks, at all. That's the glutes. That's
That's everything.
that's everything, really, the whole hip and structure. But that's a really, really nice way to do that too, is to really get those different fibers going, because oftentimes people get very focused on one area and maybe the damage may be in one area if there's a
Mhm.
tendinosis or there's other issues. And sometimes if we spread out that load, we can start to get heal that damage and really get more fibers active to help to make that hamstring work better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that this actually sort of came to me during one of your lectures when you were doing the moving fascia lecture, and we were talking about the elasticity of fascia because I had heard about the deceleration
Yeah.
and I was working on that a little bit, but then I thought, okay, how would I add elasticity into trying to heal, especially someone with a tendinosis or something
Yes.
of that nature? How could I add that in? And that's when it was like, oh, the Bosu would work really well. Or
Yeah.
something that was soft that they could land on and spring back and
Uh-huh.
find a rhythm where they're catching themselves and that hamstring is going to be pulling, but coming back,
Yep.
pulling and coming back
Yep.
smoothly.
Yep.
And you don't have to go into a deep. I tell them,
No.
it can be shallow, it doesn't matter. It's just
No.
catching yourself and
Yep.
returning.
Exactly.
And over time, what I found is that they start to go deeper into the lunge.
Mhm.
Their hamstrings don't have as much of an issue. It
Yep.
starts to wake them up because instead of doing something that's knee oriented, just a lot of knee flexion, which is shortening the muscle, or something like a stiff-legged deadlift, which is really pulling a lot at the upper end
Yeah.
and maybe causing too much. This is a
Yeah.
gentle way to sort of approach that and come out of it. And I've had a lot of success in getting people to be able to do that and be like, "Oh yeah, this does work."
Nice. Love that.
So
Yeah.
just one of those concepts to think about, adding that elasticity into this. And like you said, I do. I like to go sideways as well. So it's 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, but always
Mhm.
facing forward. So I'm doing more of a side lunge. And
Yes.
and again, short, small, doesn't have to be
Yeah.
much,
No, doesn't
but
have to be
enough to
big, doesn't have
catch
to be
you
deep.
and come back. Catch you and come back.
And,
So
in
just
the
another way to
Pilates,
do it.
yeah, I love it. In the Pilates environment, we can often do that with the jump board.
Mhm.
Or you've got the shuttle, I think, where you are, but
Yep.
it's basically like something where you can put the weight light enough so you can really focus on that being a slow jump, not a like
Yep.
I've got a land jump, and really focus on how you come through the feet, how you come through the knees, how you catch that,
Yep.
right? And that's awesome. I love that. That's really great.
Now, I'm going to give something else since I was
Yeah.
wondering if I should say this now or wait until later, but I'm going to mention it now because we've talked about the exercise being with that forward lunge.
Mhm.
I've played with this because sometimes when people talk about stretching the hamstrings or whatnot, when there is some dysfunction, sometimes stretching it can cause more issues because it
Mhm.
can be a little too aggressive. What I've found is when I've done a before and after stretch, just to see what range of motion is with this particular exercise, that forward lunge on the Bosu and return, I get significantly greater range of motion afterward than before.
Awesome.
Significant. We're talking about 10 to 15 degrees. And I've measured it because I've thought this seems odd. And I found out on my own body because I was stretching before, after I did my warm up. And then after that exercise, I went back and I stretched. And I went, wait a minute, that's a lot further. So I started, little experiment here on some clients here and there. And I thought, okay, so by doing that, you're gently stretching out the muscle with each repetition and doing it in a safe environment. And then when you take them into a stretch later, so you're basically providing some mobility, some active mobility. And then when you do a static stretch afterwards, I've seen a lot better results. So just something to think about.
That's great. I love that. I mean, you talk about dynamic mobility,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to just pulling on that hamstring. And you think about like that combination of elastic recoil through the whole myofascial system and through the tendons specifically, because that's a lot of
Mhm.
times where that happens. So that musculotendinous junction area. And then you think about the stretch reflex, right? So the stretch reflex basically says, oh, I've gone too far. I better pull you
Beep.
back.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to just kind of tighten things up. And you certainly think about something like a deadlift or a forward fold,
Yep.
right? Just a nice static forward stretch the hamstring, boom. What is the body's reaction to that? It's like, huh, we're going too far.
Hold on tight.
Right. Right. So that doesn't signal the body to have mobility. It signals the body to minimize mobility.
Mhm.
Right. And yes, again, you can overcome the stretch reflex by time and all the other, things that you can do with that. But I love the fact that here you get a dynamic action where you're not going into end range at all.
Mhm.
And especially if you do a kind of a small little lunge like that, you're not going into end range.
Yep.
You're simply, I would say in many ways, you're overcoming the stretch reflex by activating that elastic recoil reflex, which is another thing that's happening in there,
Yep.
and allowing the joint to feel safe. Right, you're
Yeah.
creating kind of some stability around the joint by all those muscles activating that whole chain from the ankle through the knee, through the hip, probably through the spine to feel like, oh yeah, I got this, I got this, I got this. I think that takes out some of that potential. Again, I'm anthropomorphizing muscles, like take this for what it is, right? It means your hamstring doesn't have to go, oh my God, I'm about to die. It's like, hey, I got this,
Yeah.
right? I've just been moved. I understand it. Everything's organized. And now I can relax into that stretch. That's
Yeah.
fascinating, Brian.
So
That's really
again,
interesting. I like
no
it.
research behind it, but just things that I've noticed
Yeah.
with a lot of clients because I've been looking at this for the past few years.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, starts with myself and then looking at it with other people, and I'm seeing the same with everybody. So it's like, oh, there might be something here. There might be
Yeah.
something. So
Absolutely.
yeah, something worth trying. Worth trying.
Yeah.
Especially if you do have a client with that tendinosis. And should we briefly discuss the
Yes, we should.
that
Since
hamstring
we've
tendinosis?
kind of thrown it out there a bunch
We've
and
been
not really
talking we've been
gone
talking
into it.
around it, so let's
Yeah.
dive into it.
So hamstring tendinosis is essentially an irritation of the attachment, typically at the ischial tuberosity. And usually it's caused by an injury of some kind, an
Yep,
overstretch, a trauma, landing from the splits, all those things. Where there is a tear, usually it's initiated by initial tear or damage to that tendon attachment. And then what happens over time, and at least in tendinosis, is that this is how I picture it. And this is a little bit of, you know, poetic license, we'll put it that way, right? So how I picture it is those fibers, right? There's a tear, those fibers jump in, all the collagen fibers, et cetera, to try to heal that. But what happens when healing happens, when collagen fibers are going in to connect a gap, right, to bring fibers back together and tissues back together, is they form kind of a big webby mess. I always think of it as felt, as opposed to like a very organized, shirt fiber, right? It's like felt. And so because of that, that means there's a lot of cross fibers that are not going in the direction of the muscle, right? It means there's like gook in there. So then when you then stretch the muscle, you tear some of those cross fibers and often reinitiate the whole inflammatory cycle that happened with the original injury. And so tendinosis is a degeneration of the actual tendon tissue that leads to this kind of cycle of inflammation. So every time somebody overstretches or does something, that whole cycle gets repeated again.
Yes.
It has to calm down. And that can go on for years, honestly, many times.
I've had a number of clients that did it in high school. They're in their
Yep, me
30s,
too.
40s,
Yep, yep,
50s.
yep.
And it's not something that plagues them on a daily basis, but it'll still rear its ugly head. And when it does, it lasts a while.
Yeah. So one of the things we think about with that, and that's why I love what Brian was just talking about, is there's actually, for me, there's always two pieces to this. So one thing is, if you can work with a manual therapist, or if you are one, this is amazing. I find that the most effective way to work with this is to actually have some manual therapy actually on that hamstring attachment, to try to minimize some of those cross fibers. And again, that can set up inflammatory things, but usually I haven't found my fascial release, manual therapy to do that much irritation of that area. But again, you're kind of like trying to break up those cross fibers so that those fibers can then regenerate in the proper direction to be able to tolerate the movement patterns you're going through. So what Brian's talking about is by taking that lunge in various different directions and doing it in that very kind of bouncy pattern. That's not quite the right way to put it.
I don't like,
no, it's not really a bounce, but just that push off and come back, that very rhythmic pattern in the body. And taking it to different angles, that helps those fibers to, again, orient and to grow in the direction of force.
Right.
And that's why exercise, along with manual therapy or along with breakdown of scar tissue, is really critically important. Because without the retraining, those cross fibers are just going to form back up again, and you're going to have an endless cycle of trouble with that area potentially.
And that's the issue too, is that area is prone to become angry again.
Yep.
And overtrain very, very easily.
Yes.
So if you even, I've had a couple clients where we think we're out of the woods and everything seems to be great for 6 or 8 months. And we'll do a simple exercise, something that we wouldn't have thought would have bothered it. And then I hear from a few days later saying, my hamstring, that spot again. And they usually call it their spot. That's what I notorious. My spots was talking to me for a few days. Like, oh, okay. Got to take that exercise out and then sort of baby it for a little bit to get it back to where it was. But it can definitely rear its ugly head, even when you think it's, to the wayside.
My favorite is the gardeners in the spring.
Oh yeah.
Right. So they go through the winter, they're really good about their program. They're not doing a lot. And they go outside and they basically weed, and they're either sitting in a funny position or they're doing a straight leg lean over and weed, or, they're leaning over and grabbing a bunch of leaves or whatever it is. And they're just straining the hamstring basically in that moment. And they come in and it's like, ow, 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 ow. And we've got to calm things down.
Yep.
Now, so tendinosis is one of those things that you're just going to have to deal with. And again, a good manual therapist, along with the work you do, the multi-angled work to retrain that, is really critical. And that just is a slow kind of up and downy process, right? You kind of make some progress and then you go back a little bit, you make some progress, you go back a little bit. A couple of the things I wanted to bring up in terms of trouble spots in that area. There's a bursa kind of in that area that can get a little bit irritated and inflamed. There is how the muscles, both with the glute max and with the hamstrings and the other muscles, interface with the ischial tuberosity. You can get pops on the ischial tuberosity sometimes, right? Where it kind of like is snapping over something. It's not that common, but I've had it a few times with clients.
Sure.
Or like they're sitting and they kind of lean to one side, they kind of go clunk and like something rolls over that sit bone. Um, it's not the same, but it's the same concept as
Mhm.
when a client has snapping hip in the front. So let's say they're doing single leg circles in Pilates, it's like kapop, 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 right? That is typically the iliopsoas tendon popping over the head of the femur. Not really always a good idea to do a lot of that, but something kind of similar can happen in the back of the body. And a lot of times I find that I've got to work on balancing and mobilizing the whole hip structure, all the deep hip areas, the hamstrings, the glutes.
Mhm.
Sometimes the piriformis is part of that little problem group there, and kind of get all that loosened up and moving in such a way that that stops happening. Again,
Yeah.
not that common, but I've had it happen a few times where it really becomes problematic, and then things get irritated over time.
Mhm. Mhm. Something else that we see a lot is the overactive hamstring, where the glutes aren't firing.
Yes.
The other muscles are not firing nearly as much, but the hamstrings are like, "I got this, guys," and they're
Yep.
really trying to fire in
Yep.
everything that you do,
Yep.
whether it be a bridge, whether it be even walking or whatever. The hamstrings are really trying to take over and everything else is kind of asleep. And then it's all about waking up the sleeping muscles and getting the hamstrings to lessen a little bit. They're still gonna be
Right.
active,
Right.
but
But they're not
not
doing all
take
the
the
job.
yeah, to not take the whole load.
Yeah.
And what I find is by changing the knee position, sometimes we can begin to affect that, sometimes straightening it out, sometimes bending it. Just changing the length of the hamstring
Aha.
can change that.
Nice.
So sometimes I just have to sneak up on it in a different way, to see if I need to get the glute to fire. Sometimes it works better in a straight leg, sometimes it works better in a bent knee. And different people work at it differently when I go into extension. So you just have to sort of play with that.
One of the things that, this may be controversial, but because I've heard this many different ways, one of the things that I focus on when I'm, let's say, doing from standing, a straight leg hip extension. So reaching the leg to the back, either from standing or from prone, if you can do that from prone.
Mhm,
And, and in standing, this is like walking, right? Pushing off from walking. What's happening there? Are
mhm.
the glutes active? Are they not active? Is all that happening from the hamstring? And what I've found is like you can like I really do think of the hamstrings and the glutes as having two separate dials. And I can kind of turn them both on, or I can turn kind of just the glute on or just the hamstring on. Not quite, but it almost feels that way.
Sure.
And one simple thing that I play with clients, either usually I do this in standing. It's easier in standing because a lot of times people are at their end range in prone or close to it anyway. But in standing, to just take that leg, let's say they're standing on a small box or something, and swing one leg back behind them. And just have that feeling of pulling that leg back behind them with some focus, and then seeing what fires.
Mhm.
Right. And I may have to like have them put their finger in their butt to feel it, or I may have my hand on their hamstring to feel what's firing when they
Yep.
do that. And then I'll have them play with a couple things. I'll have them play with, okay, squeeze the glutes first and then go into hip extension and see what happens. And then I'll say, don't squeeze the glutes at all and see what happens. So they can start to this is an awareness exercise for them to start to identify, are my glutes firing? Are my hamstrings firing? Are they both firing? Like what's going on there?
Mhm.
Because one of the things I find is if the glutes are overactive, not so common, but occasionally I see it in my athletic clients, then basically they'll fire the glutes almost immediately and decrease the range of motion hip extension.
Mhm.
With other clients, they will literally pull that leg back, and you'll put their finger will be in their glutes and nothing will be happening.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So just playing with where is that balance. And a lot of times I'll say, okay, so take the hip and now add the glutes in for that last piece. Like don't forget the glutes
Yep.
in that situation.
Yeah, I remember I was working with a client who was over a ball doing hip extension.
Yep.
And I have an exercise that we call hip extension holds, where they go into extension and we just hold the isometric contraction. Just
Yep.
hold it and then drop it down and then do it again. Same leg, hold it for 5 to 10 seconds.
Straight leg.
And a straight leg.
Yeah.
And, I was sometimes used to Poltman and just, wake it up a little bit with my fingers. And I was doing that and I was feeling nothing. Their glutes were not
Exactly.
firing. Zero.
Yes,
And
0.
she's laughing, and I'm thinking, "Can you squeeze?" She goes, "I'm trying." And I say, "Well,
Uh-huh.
there's nothing there." There was
Yep.
zero. And it took probably 6 or 8 sessions before finally, and it was her, and I saw the eyes. She went, "Oh," because she got it. And she said, "I could
Yes.
feel it." But it took a long time, and she had had a history of low back issues and all sorts of things. But it was very interesting that, again, flaccid, the muscle was not firing, but those hamstrings, man, they were doing all of the work.
And that's major glute amnesia, right?
Big time.
One quick test I do for that is have somebody sitting and just have them squeeze their butt and see if they get taller.
Yep.
And then I'll have them do what I
Butt
call butt
lifts.
popcorn, right? Where basically they do one cheek and then the other cheek. Because
Yep.
sometimes what I'll find is like they got the right, no problem. But the left is like nothing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that just wakes up, oh, like, oh, that's what you mean by firing my glutes. Because I've had clients who like I say that, like, okay, squeeze your butt and see if you get any taller, and it doesn't happen.
Right.
Like literally, either there's so little muscle mass there, occasionally that's the case, but mostly it's like there's just so little activation that
Yep.
nothing changes.
Yep.
Or else the right's left with it, but the left is not. And again, that glute hamstring
Yep.
balance is critically important. I mean, I love the fact your client has low back issues because that's going to be a classic issue
Telltale.
if you've got no glute. I mean, that's one of the things, right?
Yep. And something to keep in mind that you can always tell if the hamstrings are overactive in a hip extension exercise, whether it be over a ball, prone, quadruped. If the knee is straight, if you want them to do a straight knee hip extension, if they bend the knee each and every repetition, their hamstring is what's doing the work
Yeah,
because it's trying to bend the knee. The hamstring is
exactly.
basically hip extension, but I got this from the other end too, and it's sort of
Exactly.
shortening.
Yep.
And that's a telltale sign. So then it's almost you need to get the quadricep active to get the
Um,
hamstring out of it. So it's almost like, okay, I need you to keep that straight. So sometimes I'll cue the quadricep a little bit
mm.
and then put them into hip extension while cueing the quadricep. And then I can sometimes sneak up on the glute and not deactivate the hamstring, but just lessen it a little bit so it's not as active.
That's a really good tip for me because I've been working with 2 clients lately who that is their tendency, like in on the trap table specifically, have them just doing supine leg pulls, right? Hamstring pulls with a straight leg. And they go down and then the knee bends and they go down and not much, but just enough.
Yep.
And they don't really even make it close to the mat. Now, both of them also have limitations structurally in terms of hip extension.
Mm.
And it really is, I think, in both cases, not so much iliopsoas and rectus femoris tightness is a little bit on one of them, but it's really is just hip structure does not allow a lot of hip extension for either of them. So that's a good tip. I'm going to play with that, really activating the quads to straighten the leg before they do that.
Yeah.
That's a good tip. I'm going to play with that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a lot of things that we can do in order to begin to strengthen the hamstrings for our clients. And again, keep in mind it's a two-headed beast, so you can work the lower or the upper or both.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite exercises that I love to sort of do, and you can do this on either. Now, this is a hard exercise. Okay. This is a little bit of an advanced exercise, but when clients can do this, it is one that just gets the hamstrings like nothing else with either a ball or on a suspension trainer like the Bodhi or TRX or something, doing your hamstring curls. So what I would do is first put them into hip extension. So their feet are on the ball. Let's say the ball first. So your feet are on the ball straight ahead. They're on their back. Their hips are on the ground. Their legs are straight on the ball. They go into hip extension. So now their
Okay.
hips are off of the ground.
Yep.
Then I'm going to have them roll their heels to their butt, rolling the ball in while the hips drive upward. Now, if the hips stay put and they just do knee flexion, you get a lot of gastroc. You really get a lot of just behind that
Yeah.
knee. So
Yep.
you
Yep.
need to drive the hips up. So
Mm.
by driving the hips up, you put them into hip extension at the same time as knee flexion. So you're really shortening the hamstrings a lot. It's a great way to get the full hamstring. Then When they're a little tired, I'll keep them in at that 90 degrees and then do sort of bridge pulses, dropping the hips and back up when the knees are already bent. So now I'm focusing a little bit more on the hip extension while the hamstring's already shortened with knee flexion. So it's going to get both aspects. It is a hamstring gut buster, but
No kidding.
works
Mine are
great.
cramping just thinking about it.
It works great. Like I say, I do it on the suspension trainer as well, if they
Yeah.
can do that.
With
And
the feet in
clients
the trainer, right?
with the feet in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
trainer, the heels
Yeah, yeah,
pulling
yeah.
in. And clients say the first time they do it, of course, their hamstrings are sore for a few days, but nothing wakes them up. Nothing
Mm,
really gets both heads really active. But what it tells me a lot of times is which one do I need? If they can do knee flexion all day, but they can't go into hip extension in the same
right,
regard,
right.
that's what I need to focus in on more
Mhm.
from the hip. If they can do hip extension and bridges all day, but they can't bend their knee in hip extension, I need to focus on the knee flexion. So it
Right.
also gives me a little bit of an assessment tool.
Love it. That's awesome.
So just I wanted to throw a little functional thing out there for everybody that you can play with. And most people have a gym ball or a suspension trainer, around that they can utilize for this.
A variation of that, this is not any fun either. And I've just been playing with this with a couple of clients on the Cadillac, is a
Mhm.
variation of parakeet. This is advanced parakeet. This is really hard, but basically, so in parakeet, you're lying supine on the table and your feet are up on the push-to bar. And the push-to bar is weighted, so you've got some resistance there. And you're doing a lot of these same things with the push-to bar. So you roll up into essentially a flat back bridge, so all the way from the shoulders to the feet, and then you can take from there, bending the knees and pushing them, bending and straightening the knees,
Mm.
right? So you're stabilizing the pelvis in that case, and you're just really getting knee flexion and extension.
Mhm.
And then this is the trick. If you at some point you'll try this and you'll see what happens. You take the knees and you pull the push through bar down and then you push it forward, keeping the hips up.
Ooh.
Right. Most people fall in that
Uh-huh.
moment and land,
Me.
or they, yeah, exactly. Most people kind of just fall their butt down onto the table when they first start that. But that would be a next step, really, of what you're doing with the ball and with the suspension trainer,
Mhm.
and even just trying to get that lifting the hips up and pushing that bar, even if you're not pushing it all the way through, just bending and straightening the knees, but keeping the pelvis pressing up is going to give you some of that same idea that you're working
Mhm.
on.
I love it. I love that.
One of the little tiny piece that I sometimes do because I'm a real hamstring cramper in almost anything is I find, and I've used this a bunch of clients, if I cue the glutes as part of it, it often decreases the likelihood of hamstring cramping.
Oh, that's important. I'm gonna have to
So,
play with
for
that.
yeah, because I've got a group, like a group reformer class, and they're all doing bridging, like, right there. They're all
Yeah.
dying. So, okay, so what I want you to do on this one is squeeze the glutes first and then go
Yep.
up into your bridge. And a lot of times that decreases the hamstring. Again, that's that hamstring glute balance, kind of where am I pushing the
Mhm.
slider, pushing it a little closer to the glutes in that case, which is not usually a problem because most people
Yeah,
need a little glute work anyway.
absolutely. I love that. Well, there you go. A lot of hamstrings and a lot of practical knowledge today that gives
Yeah.
you some things to play with a little bit.
Yep.
Whether we gave you a lot of exercises and a lot of choices. You're going to want to rewind and write down some of the things you haven't tried before because like I say, give these a try. See how they feel on your body,
Yeah.
before you throw it at a client
Yep.
and see, who it would work well on. So just give you some practical application for hamstring work.
Yeah, I'm going to work on that dynamic mobility piece that you have, that little push off. I'm going to work on that right away in different angles because that's really exciting to me. And then again, the different angles, playing with the different angles, playing with hamstring versus glute, playing with knee flexion versus hip extension,
Mhm.
squats and lunges for days, but playing with where is that balance in terms of where the feet are. If there's a tendinosis, just being aware of the healing cycle of that and find a good
Yep.
manual therapist for all your people.
Yes.
Um, yeah, really good stuff. Thank you, Brian. I learned a
Perfect.
lot. I've got a bunch more tools in my toolbox now. I feel very happy.
Excellent. Excellent. Me too. Me too. I get to play with a few things.
Yeah.
Well, Thank you guys for joining us again here at Moving Conversations. Again, if you like what you heard, give us a 5-star rating. We would really appreciate it. And comment whenever you see us on social media. Every comment helps our algorithm, so we really appreciate that. If you want to get in touch with us, movingconvos@gmail.com is the best place to get in touch with us. Moving Convos on Instagram. We've got a lot of exercise and a lot of good fun stuff on there, so feel free to dive into there a little bit and enjoy. And for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye, guys.